but I think we owe it all to our panelists. We're going to begin right now because we have a tight out time in terms of top of the hour, because there is an event here starting at 15:15 or 50 minutes after we finish. So let me get started immediately. You know, after having the privilege of moderating a session on the Southern Caucasus, I find myself in another important geopolitical hotspot, and I really thought that I could really enjoy at least a bit of the beautiful Antalya weather. Joking aside, it doesn't matter what perspective you look at it from, what angle you approach it at, the Eastern Mediterranean is a very important geopolitical hotspot. One of the main reasons why there is a loggerhead perhaps is the recent discovery of important hydrocarbon reserves in the region. And besides the true players, regional players in the region, we've seen external players throw their hat in. France, we've actually had countries from the Gulf also get involved as well. So, and obviously the conflict in Libya has added a new dimension, a different dimension to the discussions as well. I suppose at a very basic level, the way that I see it, at least from the perspective of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, is there are two problems. One is the unresolved issue on the divided island of Cyprus. It is still unresolved. It is an important topic that we're also dealing here at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. And also the issue of maritime borders between Greece and Turkey and the exclusive economic zones. So welcome to this regional conference for the Eastern Mediterranean. We'll be discussing the current developments. We'll be addressing ways on how not only we can lower tensions, but also keep them low and also find productive ways on how we can move forward. Let me introduce to our guests here, our panelists. Nejla Mangush is the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Libya. Welcome to Antalya. Everis Bartolo, Minister of European and Foreign Affairs for Malta. Aoun Khassaneh, the former Prime Minister of Jordan. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Prime Minister. Professor Hakan Kıran, he is the chair of the board of director of Ankara University's National Center for the Sea and Maritime Law. And rounding out this group of five, Dr. Joseph Bahoud, he's an academician at the American University of Beirut. Welcome to all of you. I would like to say that since we're dealing with the Eastern Mediterranean, you may wonder why we don't have anybody from Greece. I would like to say that the Antalya Diplomacy Forum had sent invitations to the Greek side. Unfortunately, we would have loved to have them here, but not for the moment, but hopefully next year. Joseph, I want to start with you. I want your perspective on this. I know you've been quite active on Twitter. I do appreciate that. I've been following it. But give us the lay of the sea.
The lay of the sea is interesting because it's a new given, in fact, because if you allow me to make a very quick promenade or tour in time and space, I would say that if you go back some 2 decades ago, the problems of the MENA region, broadly speaking, were mainly the Arab-Israeli question, Iran and the Gulf, and then some Arab rivalries. The Mediterranean was more a kind of leftover or remnant problem of the Cold War, and it was treated differently. Also, in time, when you look back at what are the formats that have tried to cope with the Mediterranean issues, you had, first of all, some, let's say, byproducts of the Madrid conference. That was a huge umbrella after the end of the Cold War with some sectorial issues, and ultimately it stopped and failed. You had then the Union pour la Méditerranée, or the Union for the Mediterranean. That was a kind of offshoot of the Euromed process. It also halted because of the Arab-Israeli question mainly and other issues. So all the questions were, let's say, eastward. Today, the new given, as you said it, because of the hydrocarbons, because of the energy, new equation, and also because probably, and we have to talk about this, I mean, partly the results of the unresolved questions opened by the Arab revolutions, Libya, Syria, other issues that are at the core of what happened in the Arab world 10 years ago, new problems between Turkey and Greece, the Cyprus question, but also the East Med gas conundrum that is now putting at play new actors like Egypt, like also the Gulf states, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia are today Mediterranean players. They were not. Turkey is a rising power in the area, and you have also a set of friction between European countries themselves, and I think that we also have to acknowledge that Europe as a Mediterranean player is no more a unified actor. You have rivalry between Italy and France, you have maybe slight divergences between France and Germany, and then also you have this friction between Turkey as a potent new player and a set of European actors, be them Germany on one side, but mainly France, even though these questions were resolved lately. So if you take all this, in fact, this new equation, the question to be asked is, do we need a Mediterranean security architecture format? Definitely, yes. However, what can be this format, what this format can be, is the first question. And second, what are the impediments for that? I think that on the first question, we also have to take back some lessons and takeaways from what happened behind. I mentioned the Madrid conference. It couldn't work because of a lot of things. Union pour la Méditerranée and Euromed could not work because there was too maybe carrots and not enough sticks. There was no potent player to impose something. My preference, and I think that with the colleagues here we'll probably discuss it, my preference, or the thing that seems to me as something that could work, is something like the Helsinki process, something like the OSCE process that in fact helped Europe transition after the Cold War. This has the advantage of putting everybody on the table, but also the main advantage is to mixing hard security and soft security issues. The Mediterranean has hard security issues, military confrontation, naval routes, water borders, we'll talk about them, but also soft security and human security issues. Migration, poverty, development, lack of democracy, lack of rule of law, and etc. So you have to build this common space around interest, of course, but also around values. Now, the impediments today, we all know them. We'll talk at length about them. They are mainly the clash between the two Mediterranean giant in the Aegean Sea, Greece and Turkey, but also you have the Levantine problems and the Arab problems, North African problem, Libya, Tunisia, and others that are also reverberating increasingly on the Mediterranean and rendering all this kind of difficult, especially if we still hold, and I think that this is one of the reproaches that we can make to the West in general, to still hold to a only security-focused approach and not taking into account the problems of human development, of economic development, of justice, of freedom, of rule of law. I wouldn't say democracy if you don't want to, but pluralism, inclusion, and political development. If we don't take these into account, if you only focus on security, I think the Mediterranean is very much maybe the candidate for becoming the next clashing space within this era.
Very good points made there, and we'll talk about sort of how we can possibly create this common space in the coming minutes. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to turn to you because Joseph was talking about how the nature of the problem in the Eastern Mediterranean has changed, changing its nature from Arab rivalries and the Arab-Israeli conflict to what it is right now. Is it still, at the end of the day, are we still approaching this as a zero-sum game?
Well, this being the first time I come to Antalya, I should at the outset say how delighted I am to be here and how honored indeed to participate in this meeting. And for both the delight and the honor, I owe a debt of gratitude to His Excellency Mr. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu and his colleagues, some of whom are here. And I have been presented by you and in the brochure as the former Prime Minister of Jordan, but my interest in the topic doesn't arise from that. It arises more from the fact that before I became a Prime Minister, I was a judge on the International Court of Justice for over 12 years. And those of you who follow the work of the International Court of Justice will have noticed that most of the cases in that decade, in the last 2 decades, have been concerned with questions of maritime delimitation all over the world, in Southeast Asia, in the Black Sea, but mostly, for some reason or another, in the Caribbean. And when I think of the Eastern Mediterranean, the thing that comes immediately to mind is the Caribbean Sea. Of course, the configuration of states with respect to the sea is never the same in the same situations, but there are many similarities, and I recall that the establishment of maritime boundaries in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, where there were also competition for natural resources, is an example that could have been improved on. To give but one example, Nicaragua's maritime borders and sometimes territorial boundaries were determined by the ICJ. And I keep thinking, what if the countries of the Caribbean had the vision to have come to an agreement on the division of the waters, or failing that, on the development of joint projects? Because the problem in the Mediterranean is both the question of sovereign and political symbolism, but it is also made more acute by the fact that modern technology has made it possible to explore and exploit the natural resources that we are discovering are present in the Mediterranean. There are other examples. I'm not talking about the larger, picture that you've been kind enough to speak about, but the more immediate concern. There are examples, for example, for Japan and Korea. There might be examples also in the Mediterranean. There are two ways of dealing with this. One is to pursue diplomatic negotiations and to exhaust them. And in my respectful opinion, that is probably the best way to do it. The other avenue, as it were, is resort to arbitral or judicial settlement. Now, as a former judge of the court, you would expect me to be in favor of judicial settlement, but I will readily recognize that it has its advantages and disadvantages. Someone has to be slightly unhappy with the result of a judicial decision. And the other thing about judicial decisions with regard to maritime delimitation is not the basic treaty, the Law of the Sea Convention, recognizing that states in their configuration with regard to the sea was unable, and it was not humanly possible to arrive at a waterproof formula. So a lot was left to the concept of equity, which is expressly recognized there. Some people like equity more than others, but I can confidently say that the concept of equity has been refined, so to speak, by the decisions of the ICJ, which now contemplate a three-stage process. First of all, you establish an equidistance line. Then you make amendments to take into consideration special circumstances. And thirdly, and this is very important, once as a court you do that, you look at the overall picture in terms of equity, in the sense that the result should not be blatantly without a sense of equity. So these are two ways to do it. In an ideal world, I really cannot see why the countries around the Mediterranean could not come to do this either through judicial settlement, better still through compromise and diplomatic negotiations. I think I better stop here.
Not stop, but I think maybe we should move on. I will try to see if an equitable solution is really possible. Everest, I want to turn to you. Malta is unique, not only because of its geographic position, but also the position that you represent in terms of EU affairs. What is Malta's position in all this?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we're meeting under the general theme of innovative diplomacy and new era, new approaches. And while we must find innovative diplomacy, I think it's also important to have a good dose of old-fashioned diplomacy, because I see very little of it. By diplomacy, I mean being civilized towards each other, and if we are enemies, we try to sit down and discuss what our problems are. Because at the moment, I see a lot of diplomacy, which is the continuation of war by other means. And one thing that we need to do, and it's not easy, I have no idea that, I'm an illusion, I'm too old for that, to think of diplomacy as a romantic soap opera that we will all, hug each other and live happily ever after. But it's the alternative to tear each other apart. And I think today, with all the changes that have taken place, and what I'm saying applies also for within the European Union and the observations that have been made, I think we are at a very difficult stage. We talk a lot about the climate emergency, but I would say that one of the biggest emergencies that we have, without obviously saying that the climate emergency or the climate crisis is not important, I would say we have a coexistential crisis. It's become a big challenge to live together. And if we do not understand each other, our geography, our history, our culture, our politics, we will repeat.
Are you talking about countries within the European Union as well?
As well, yes. Yes. I think we have become strangers to ourselves, let alone to others. But then we need a difficult act of civilization for enemies to become human beings. It's very important. And I think if we can learn something from the great Nelson Mandela, is that if you have problems, you either go to war, or, however difficult it is, you sit down with your enemies to become partners.
Hakan, I want to turn to you. Everest was talking about this binary situation right now. Either we go to war or we try to find a way to work it out. What is the top priority here? Is it to sort of find a solution immediately, or do we sort of find ways to reduce tensions?
Firstly, I would like to start again, as Excellency states, express my sincere thanks to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for his kind invitation to this organization. Coming to your question, is a good question. Anyway, I mean, I'm totally agree with the Excellency's answer. The first thing, the law of the sea or the international law of the sea requires the peaceful uses of oceans and also seas, wherever they are. As you know, there are so many names of the seas, such as the Eastern Mediterranean, Aegean, whatsoever, but there is only one sea in the world which connects all people to each other. For example, if I ask anybody here whether Turkey has a border with, let's say, Syria, Iraq, Iran, yeah, we have. What about Japan? What about Australia? What about the United States? We do have border with them, thanks to the sea. So because of that, all the parts of the sea should be used for peaceful purposes. Again, because of this duty, the states should act in good faith in the operation or in the performance of their obligations and also their rights. How could they do so? They could only do so with the cooperation and collaboration. And especially the conference, regional conference for Eastern Mediterranean, could really ease the cooperation and collaboration and understanding of all people. We are here not to fight. We are here to decrease the level of misunderstanding between all the states in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, because the Eastern Mediterranean Sea is a semi-enclosed sea, and the law of the sea specifically requires for the states to cooperate and collaborate in this region, whatever their political situation or whatever economic situation is. And especially all the actors in this area, in this region, should cooperate to each other. Whether they are state, whether they are authorities, whatsoever. They need to be on the same table to decrease the level of, as I said, misunderstanding to each other. Again, there are so many ways. His Excellency stated, of course, there is a need for reaching an agreement to achieve an equitable solution. The agreement should either be for the delimitation of maritime disputed areas, but at the same time, the agreement should be for the joint development, joint management of the areas as well. Because especially the delimitation of maritime jurisdiction areas is a little bit harder comparing to the joint agreement, joint development or joint management agreements. Because the former has got a sense of sovereign issue, drawing a public attention much. And again, we could use the joint development or joint management of the disputed areas on a temporary basis as well, up to the time of settling our disputes in the area, which gives an opportunity to provide joint exploitation and exploration of these areas. Right now, I mean, all the human beings needed all these resources in the area. Then first we decide whether we need these resources, and then we can talk about the sharing. And this is the way we could ease the understanding. And also, as I stated, this is the peaceful purposes. I mean, we are talking about the Eastern Mediterranean Sea or Mediterranean Sea. I mean, it's a kind of heart of the civilization since the ancient times. But nowadays, because of the unilateral actions by several states in the region, it's quite difficult to state that there is no need for a cooperation or collaboration. Okay. So many states, including Turkey, because of the unilateral actions taken by other states, responded all these unilateral actions with another unilateral actions. So, I mean, it's a good topic, especially the regional conference for Eastern Mediterranean. And if we sit on the table, I believe that we'll talk, and then we'll understand each other's problems, and then try to then settle the dispute. But up to that time, all the states should refrain from any act or action which would hamper or jeopardize the final settlement of dispute. Thank you.
And we hope that, you know, innovative diplomatic efforts or methods can actually sort of succumb to this tit for tat that we've seen. All right, Madam Minister, I guarantee you I'm a chivalrous man. I do apologize for leaving you to last, but I want to get your perspective. Hakan was talking about not only land borders, but sea borders, that every country had shares borders with others if they have, you know, a coastline. Libya shares a border with Turkey because of an agreement in 2019. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
You mean the maritime agreement?
Yes.
Well, thank you, first of all, and I will extend my gratitude to His Excellency for giving us this opportunity to participate in the diplomacy forum. I'm glad that we have the mix between academia and politics, and to see how the gap between practice and theory. But before I answer your question, it's very important to look to the overall picture when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, region, including Libya. I think there is a huge potential for regional collaboration if we created a sense of regional norms and institutions that could lead to potential, further stability in the region and also aid conflict resolution support, which I mean, this is a huge potential here we have as a countries. However, there is limitation for this potential for two reasons. This is what my colleagues mentioned, that because we have different interests or different national interests for those countries, plus long-standing conflict in places like Palestine and Syria, and including Libya and Lebanon, where we have different scenarios and different ways the region is acting from their perspective. Libya shared borders with a lot of countries, including Egypt and Tunisia and Africa, but also in the sea we share with a lot of neighbors, include Turkey. And I think if we think of ways of engaging in a way that we shared interest from both sides, and we understand that every country have its own interest, but we can share those interests in a way that can promote stability and security in the region. I think this is going to be the key. Okay. Either the agreement that you mentioned or other agreements. The way that I see in the agreements, they are a way of reflecting the way that both countries understand their relationship and how they can navigate the challenges through those borders. Always the problems with borders and always the problems with international law. And I'm not saying with Turkey, I'm saying in general. Yeah. But also there is a space of coming from place that we care of our interest and the country interest, and how we can share it in a peaceful way without affecting our neighbors or countries.
Okay. Joseph, I want to turn back to you. Hakan was saying, whether you're a state, an authority, or entity, there needs to be a joint platform where everybody is involved. And the common theme in the first round of questions was there needs to be regional cooperation. I'm going to bring in the issue of Cyprus here because I have to, and I think Hakan sort of alluded to that. It doesn't matter if you're an authority or entity. I think that's what you were trying to say. How does Cyprus and the nature of it being an unresolved issue, play into all this?
Look, first of all, a full caveat and disclosure, I'm not a specialist of the Cyprus crisis, but as far as I know, of course, it's one of the main today impediments for a solid Mediterranean construction of any sort. First of all, because it's a divided land, and as all divided lands, it will fester with time and produce a set of problems that we even cannot envisage today. I mean, you have to look at other places not far from there, not far from Cyprus, and see how unresolved, not only border disputes, but national, symbolic, let's say, nationalistic feelings left unresolved can fester with time and produce a set of nasty phenomena like terrorism, like violence, like etc., etc. The second issue is that Cyprus is today, let's say, one of the focal points where the two Mediterranean old giants, let's say Turkey and Greece, are confronting each other. Now, I'm sure that there are several and enough, let's say, mechanisms to solve or to quell down or to de-escalate the tension between Turkey and Greece themselves. There is NATO, there is the EU, although insufficient, and there is also the reason. But there are other issues that are not...
Why have you called the EU insufficient here?
The EU?
Yeah.
Because of what we said and because of what I said also. Because first of all, the EU, and it's unfortunate, is not yet a diplomatic and political actor, at least not a strong and unified one for reasons we know, but also because, and here I think this is a very important issue, national and let's say, yes, national selfishness and egoism is sometimes superseding and overlapping with this, let's say, necessity of building a unified European sovereignty and policy. I mentioned France and Germany, I mentioned France and Italy. I mean, you look at it from, for example, the angle of the country where I come from Lebanon. Also, you can see that you don't have a unified European voice. Today, Josep Borrell is in Beirut. He's talking for Europe. But a few weeks ago, you had also a French special envoy coming and saying something maybe slightly slightly different at some point, an Italian one, and etc. So all this is impeding and weighing on the EU becoming a unified actor. Let me come back to Cyprus and Turkey, and to Cyprus, Turkey, and Greece. Yeah. So I said if it's not resolved, it will fester and give way to other difficulties. But you have other issues, and you mentioned them, Mr. President. I mean, the issue of gas and oil and energy in the Mediterranean Sea that I don't see easy to deal with in a format like the EU or other. This probably will need some other device and some other mechanism. And as I said before, what probably will render all this complicated is that, and we have to look at the geopolitical broad context, you have a Mediterranean that was once the Mare Nostrum, we know, a space for common values and etc., but that is today more and more torn apart and polarized between rising powers that are outside the Mediterranean. We haven't mentioned Russia so far. Russia is today a Mediterranean power. Russia has 2 bases on the Mediterranean in Syria. It is probably negotiating, I think, very closely finalizing a base in Libya. It is having a foothold in Syria, in Egypt. It is close to Algeria, and probably it is in very good terms also with Israel on many levels. So Russia is today a Mediterranean power. How will we approach this? How will we integrate Russia in this equation? China, which is not so far a potent actor, is someone who is also trying to get a foothold, not maybe directly in the Mediterranean, but although in Syria in some spaces, in Djibouti, in Africa. So it is also becoming very shortly and very soon a Mediterranean actor. On the contrary, on the other side, the US is retrenching. It is probably lightening its footprints in the region, in the Mediterranean and elsewhere. I don't know, maybe Mr. Minister can tell us a little bit about Malta, because it's an important base for the US Navy. But you have also these broad geopolitical differences, shifts that are occurring. Plus, I mentioned the entry of, let's say, regional actors that are not border powers of the Mediterranean. So we mentioned the Gulf states, and I think you can talk a lot about that, because Libya is today one of the projection themes of this rivalry between Gulf states themselves. And here, it's like Europe, we don't have a unified Gulf actor. So for all these reasons, yes, we need a format, but I'm not sure that one format fits all the problem, at least today, as long as we have not put on the table and really debunked and let's say, looked very serenely at the problems as they are and have sorted them out. I add also, for an ending, I mean, you mentioned non-state actors when you were alluding to Turkish Cyprus, or to the Turkish part of Cyprus. For someone like me who comes more from the Middle East, from the East, from the Levant, non-state actors sometimes could be actors like Daesh, like Al-Qaeda, like pirate groups. I mean, the same that was happening in the Oman Strait, in the Gulf of Oman, in the Sea of Oman, or in the Indian Sea a few decades or a century ago, we could very easily witness it also in the coming years and decades in the Mediterranean, under the form of non-state actors that are acting, competing, and sometimes equaling in power, or at least in might or in challenge with classical state actors. So this is to say that the problem is, of course, diplomacy has to be, and reason has to prevail, and we have to talk to each other about our interests and etc., and about our values, because we forget that values sometimes could contradict with interests. But I think that the Mediterranean equation and conundrum is becoming very complicated with time, and I don't think, once again, that one format today, with the prevalent conditions of today, the rivalries, the insufficient, let's say, hard power actor from outside, can solve it into a one format. This needs imagination. I agree with you, classical diplomacy will never die, but I think that on the Mediterranean, we really need some inventive and some innovative ways of thinking outside the box.
I think I need to sort of maybe suppress my journalistic instincts in me for a little bit as I'm trying to moderate this, but I could pick up on some very provocative comments that you made. But that aside, the fact is that there are multiple layers here. And Joseph talked about this being a basin of common values. When I hear common values, I think of the European Union. So Everest, I want to turn to you. Can the European Union be impartial in this matter?
So first of all, let me put some records straight. I'm very proud to come from Malta because the UNCLOS, International of the Sea, was born in Malta.
Yeah.
As one of the smallest states in the world, for us, international law is crucial. The United Nations is crucial. When last year we had tension in the Eastern Mediterranean and other states were sending NV, the only NV we can send is not a naval vessel, but a not verbal, to talk about what is happening. Number two, Malta is a neutral state. It doesn't offer bases to anyone, either the United States or any other power. We have constitutionally bound ourselves not to allow to be used by others. This is one of also our tension within the European Union. And I wouldn't be afraid to say that I would dread the day when the European Union has a common foreign and security policy. Because that would mean, is it a French security policy? Is it a German security policy? Is it a hegemonic security policy within the EU? What can we do if we want to say, listen, instead of confronting one side against the other, let's sit down, let's talk, let's keep on negotiating. So about the common values, we talk a lot about the common values, but then it's very important to talk about the practice, what happens. I still think we're at the stage where national foreign policies and national interests prevail over a common foreign and security policy. But I do not want to go there. For me, at this present moment, going there would be bad news for countries like Malta and like Ireland, for example, who have a neutral foreign policy. One thing I'd like to say, which I know have to be very careful on how to express myself regarding the Cyprus issue, but also I think the Middle East issue. When we have UN resolutions which need a reality check, I would like first to have an honest reality check of that UN resolution, and if needs be, change the UN resolution. Do not change the reality on the ground to make the United Nations resolution irrelevant.
Of the UNCLOS?
No, I'm saying about Cyprus, and I'm saying about the Middle East, the issue between the Israeli and the Palestinians, because if we take the Israeli and the Palestinian issue,
okay,
even all, goodwill, we want a two-state solution. Is it still possible with the reality on the ground? And I would say the same about Cyprus. Please, before we undermine and challenge the existing UN resolution, if that needs to be changed, change the UN resolution. For a country like ours, which needs the international rule of law, which needs the values of the United Nations Charter, we do not like UN resolutions to be undermined. So if there is a need for a reality check, let's change the UN resolution. Please do not change the reality on the ground to make it irrelevant. I think it's important to go that way because that is in the light also of what we're saying. It's not might is right. It's actually sitting down. One thing that we'll learn from all that we've said, I think, if you exclude anyone, that person or that country or that community will feel not only that its destiny is being shaped without it, but it's being shaped against it. So that's why we need to be inclusive. We need to be inclusive.
Mr. Prime Minister, Everest was talking about the need for a reality check. I want to pick up on that, on the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. Jordan is a member. Turkey is not. Why do you think that is, especially when you consider the fact that Turkey has the longest continental shoreline on the Eastern Mediterranean? I mean, if we're talking about reality checks and a need for a common platform to be looked at, shouldn't Turkey be involved here?
I think I can say without any fear of contradiction that it stands to reason that Turkey should have been included from the beginning. I would even go further and say that the way in which this Eastern Mediterranean gas, I can't remember exactly the title, was created in such a way that could not but have been intended to keep Turkey outside. And I think that is, I mean, by any reality check, that is surrealistic, at least, and will ultimately not work. I know that there were even attempts to make it so exclusive as to prevent Turkey from joining. I cannot find any legal or moral justification for that. But while I have the floor, if I may, I wanted just to comment on something that Professor referred to. I agree totally with most of what you have said about outside forces now interfering in the Mediterranean, in the Eastern Mediterranean. Where I would not put the same emphasis as you did is with regard to the question of non-state actors. I think there is a bit of exaggeration there, and I'll tell you why. Non-state actors are a very old phenomena. I was recently looking at some treaties in the Middle Ages, and I was struck by a treaty that was concluded in 1404 between, on the one hand, the Mamluk viceroy of Alexandria, and on the other, the maritime powers of Europe, I think Amalfi, in which it spoke of non-state actors who were the pirates of the time, and established what could, I always tend to go into the international law. I should, restrain myself into a universal jurisdiction idea. I agree that outside powers' contribution has been rather negative or negligent with regard to the core idea of the maintenance of international peace and security, and that the area came very dangerously to the brink of war last year. But I mean, why shouldn't there be a regional institution or a mechanism under Chapter 8? People always talk about Chapter 7 of the Charter. Chapter 8 of the Charter, which is rarely referred to, could have provided institutions for the solution of this problem. And in fact, for the problem of Syria, had it been utilized, and probably of Libya. Now, with regard to these two questions, probably too late, but I think if we are to learn any lesson, the idea should be seriously contemplated.
Okay, National Manguch, I want to talk to you because and bring up an issue that was actually brought up by two of our panelists, and that is outside intervention and the potential for these external actors to sort of derail any progress. Libya, your country, is not a stranger to all this. How do you see this in terms of bringing stability to the Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, this is a really good question. Require a day, but I will try to highlight some aspects related to the current situation. Well, before we talk about Libya, I just realized in my short experience that when you come from a place that they struggle with conflict, there is a sense of vulnerability. It comes when you negotiate in the table. And because of the power dynamics regionally and internationally, it's always hard to advocate for your own rights as a country, as a struggling in transition. Libya is doing better compared to the past. However, we have a lot of challenges, security challenges, military challenges, and also a lot of economical obstacles. Libya today is international file, especially when it comes to security. And this file has been dealt with for a long time since the revolution, for many years. And now we are in a place, as unity government, we try to own the process. Well, owning the process itself, it's very challenging because we need to push so far for our agenda with all these international interference, with all these different agendas, with all these different versions about how the future of Libya will look like. Well, I echo Mr. Joseph in terms of how to unite the vision, especially regionally and internationally when it comes to the future of Libya. I think to answer this question is first of all, we need to be united as a country first, and we need to send a clear message about what is our priority now in security and in stability and also in economically. But also we need to advocate for this agenda and these priorities with partners and regional actors to push forward for more stability in the region. Again, as I told you, with all these international interference, it's very hard to navigate, let's say, the power dynamic language that I can, sense with those big countries who feel that they can really negotiate on behalf of us.
Truly diplomatically spoken. Thank you. I do appreciate it. Hakan, I want to turn to you because I want to start. I know there's a couple of questions in the audience, and I want to leave time for that. It's been almost a year since President Erdogan sort of put forth this idea of a regional conference. Can you share your thoughts on that in terms of development? We still don't have a date. We don't know the participants. Can it be convened anytime soon?
I mean, the other answer of the question is up to the coastal states to the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. From my point of view, I mean, the agreement could only be reached among the coastal states of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. But as I stated, even the administrations could be a party or could be a party to any, or could be part of this conference. I'm not talking about Daesh or something else. I mean, I'm just talking about people who have been represented in there for a very long time. So I'm talking about the people in Cyprus. I'm not gonna divide any part of the Cyprus from each other. They need to be all presented on the table. Again, I would like to state one more thing about the EU participation to this conference. Okay, as a citizen or as a person, as a human being living in this area, it's going to be much helpful for any external participation. But we must understand that I'll bring a question to the European Union country representatives. Do you have any mandate on the delimitation of maritime areas in the region? No. The European Court exactly states that there is no mandate of the European Union to deal with these aspects. Okay, the European Union could have some wordings for the protection of marine environment, for the protection of fish stocks, for the protection of human rights at sea. Coming to the last one, I'm not really sure whether there is a good approach from the European Union for the protection of human rights at sea, especially human rights of not only seafarers, but also especially irregular immigrants. So there is another problem as well, apart from the boundary issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. Coming to the recommendation from our president, I mean, this is the only way we could reach an agreement. We could settle the dispute in the area. So I don't know, I cannot understand why we are still waiting for a kind of meeting or a conference to be organized. Are waiting for external powers? We don't need that. The only problem is that we need to refrain from any unilateral actions which jeopardize or hamper the settlement of disputes in future. And we need to act fast, maybe starting from tomorrow. But my wish was the participation of our Greek friends on this atmosphere as well, but it didn't happen. So how could we reach a conference, or how could we deal with our problems with talks? And so it's now I'm sure that in the end, because of the peaceful uses of maritime zones, I mean, we come to the end of this conference in 1 year, in 2 years, I don't know, but this is the only way we could reach a common understanding in the area. That's all I would like to say.
Everett Sarkhan was looking at you when he was answering this question. From a European Union perspective, how do you think this dialogue can actually foster a better environment?
In words, there is acceptance to have this conference. And because it also fits in with what you were saying before, what we've learned from Helsinki and from what we've learned for Europe can work for the Eastern Mediterranean if there is the attitude to make it work, because everything depends ultimately on the political will to make something work or not. Charles Michel has also been on record to say that he agrees with this approach. The problem, as I said before, is when you have member states whose will and whose decision is stronger than that of the European Union as a whole. That is the problem. And unless there is an agreement on that, and at least the agreement should be, let us sit down. Let us sit down and talk. Not let us first resolve our problems and then sit down and talk. Then you don't need to talk, then you need to celebrate. So I think always the compulsion, let's sit down and talk. I think that should always be the most important thing. And that's why I go back to what I said before. We need some good old-fashioned diplomacy that, you can sit down with the people you disagree with. Otherwise, why should we have diplomacy? As far as I know, you don't need diplomacy for friends. Friends, you just talk. But diplomacy, you need them for enemies, where you sit down and see what you can do without humiliating them, reaching a compromise, which is not capitulation, helping them not to lose face, not putting them in a corner, and have a lot of patience. That's very important, and not preach self-righteously either.
Okay, before I hand it over to the floor for questions from audience, here's what I understand. I understand the current laws. I understand the judicial structure as well. I understand, what I've understood is that there needs to be a common platform or dialogue. But one thing is for sure, that whether it's the Aegean or the Eastern Mediterranean, it is unique. Can we have unique solutions to this region? Maybe one sentence from each before I hand it to the audience.
I'm not sure it's so unique. I mean,
Okay.
you have in the 20th century conflicts that were really very long. I mean, I won't talk about the Arab-Israeli one or the Israeli-Palestinian one, because unfortunately it's not solved the best way it could have been solved, or it has to be solved. But look at, for example, something similar, which is the sharing of waters, maritime borders, energy, and etc. in the Gulf area. I mean, it's been ongoing for maybe 30, 40 years, but there's no war there. I mean, there's no open clash. There are some mechanisms of quelling the issues, and now if there is a deal between a rejuvenated deal between Iran and the Western power and the international community, this can be solved in a way or another. We mentioned the Helsinki process, which is not a sea question or a maritime question, but it was a probably more complicated question where you had, I mean, strategic, nuclear, symbolic, ideological, cultural, and etc. And it was also solved. I mean, what maybe helps the Mediterranean is that, and you all mentioned it, and yourself more in particular, it has a very, let's say, rich stock of cultural heritage together. I mean, I'm a reader of Brodel and all these people. Frankly, I think, and this is why I love the Mediterranean also, it's a space that can be really a common space for exchange, not only of goods and human beings, but also of ideas and cultures. And if it goes back to this heritage, I think that a lot of things can be done. The same could be said about Europe. I mean, the European construction was done 5 or 10 years after one of the biggest butcheries of the humankind history. And today it's a common space. It's a space for sharing values, goods, and interests, and etc. I don't see why the Mediterranean would escape that. Sure, of course, tensions has to go down. Probably everybody has to be more or less satisfied. On the note here, maybe I'm taking a risk, but I was struck yesterday by President Erdogan's speech. That was a very, let's say, calming and open speech, extending a hand for a lot of countries of the region, probably because he wants to make this format succeed. It is as if today most of the countries, and not all of them, and this is the challenge, most of the countries have more or less got what they wanted from this space, and now they are ready to sit on the table in order to do, let's say, the final solution. The problem, like always, and this is a lesson from Metternich and Kissinger and etc., is that when you have a power that is still, or an actor, maybe a non-state actor, that is still unsatisfied, that feels humiliated, that feels excluded, and that has the means to topple the table and disrupt the game. This is the challenge and not something else.
Okay, I have about 5 minutes left. Anybody have questions? Yes, sir, please. If you could just stand up and...
Yes. Obviously, there are many things I can think of to say, but being the foreign minister of Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, there was a lot of reference to Cyprus. And I was especially struck with what my colleague from Malta was saying about UN resolutions. Change the resolutions rather than trying to change the reality to fit the resolution. And that's exactly what we as Turkish Cypriots expect from the United Nations organization. Having made the wrong diagnosis of the Cyprus problem, the United Nations is the one organization that is responsible for lack of settlement on the island of Cyprus, but it's the Turkish Cypriots who are suffering, having been kicked out of the partnership, and it is the Greek Cypriots who have been given all the advantages in spite of the fact that they are the ones who broke the partnership. I wonder what the honorable panelists...
Do you have a specific question, though?
What does the panel think about the Cyprus problem itself in view of what my colleague from Malta has just said? Change the UN Security Council resolutions to fit the reality rather than force the reality to fit the resolution, the wrong resolution.
You have your question, sir.
I would appeal for patience to work with the United Nations rather than to change the reality on the ground. Because I think it will complicate matters. I know, it is, I know.
I think maybe for a couple more. Yes, sir?
Thank you very much. And my question goes to Madam Foreign Minister of Libya. Well, I think one of the most important things to keep the regional stability is Libya's ability to keep its territorial integrity and political unity. And you have rightly mentioned and complained about international interference. But I think we need to know, I think you need to be more specific. Which countries are really playing a constructive role and which countries are playing a destructive role? And more specifically, how will you place Turkey's role in Libya throughout the process?
It's a very tricky question.
I think you're on the spot.
You're happy because I wasn't able to answer your question, so now he put me in the corner. But anyways, well, to be fair, the players have been playing different role in different stages. If we want to distinguish between the phase before the unity government and now, I think there is a lot of progress when it comes to a lot of actors, especially when it comes to Europe and when it comes to some Gulf countries. There is a changing in the narrative. And again, I told you why. Because we come as a Libyan since a long time with one version about how we see the future of our Libya, how they see the future of our country. And this is lesson not just for Libya, for any country have similar situation. If you have one narrative that you are advocating for and you are clear about your priorities, the international community will start navigating and changing their direction because they don't have other choice if they want to be engaged. Well, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be, spoilers. And we have local spoilers, but also we have international spoilers who, associated with some, militia groups, associated with, some entity that not necessarily are helping the process of Libya. And I think this is something that we need to learn all the way, that we want to unite the version of this, the way that those countries look to the future of Libya. Precisely, we have Berlin 2 now on June 23rd, where Libya, for the first time, we're going to participate in this international platform. Berlin 1, Libya wasn't part of the process, wasn't part of the conversation, wasn't part of the dialogue. The international community, on behalf of us, they were they are putting the agenda and identifying the future of the country. So now in Berlin 2, we have this chance as a Libyan, as unity government, to come in a place arguing and trying to explain the reality. Is the reality really resonate with the UN resolutions and with Security Council resolution, or there are challenges that we need to take in our consideration? So, I don't want to mention names because, first of all, it's as I told you, maybe the enemy of yesterday is our friend today because we change our positions. And the other thing as well, we are in a place where we need support from everyone to push for the peace and stability agenda in our country.
And I think it's a common theme that we can actually maybe spread across the entire region. I'm glad I gave you the last word. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in actually thanking our wonderful panelists. I was asked by the organizers of the event to end sharply at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. Thank you.